Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. PAX is officially kicked off in Seattle, Washington. You know what that means. We have a lot of preview cards to look at for the upcoming set, Kaladesh. We have 18 in total, a whole bunch of new cards, whole bunch of new mechanics. We even have some new creature types. We have a returning creature type that we haven't seen in a long time. We have some amazing artwork on these cards. Fantastic panels today. I would encourage you, if you didn't get a chance to see them at some point, check out Wizards YouTube channel and watch them if you can, because they were really well done. First, they did an opening presentation where they just started talking about the set in general. Then they moved into the world building panel, and then finally the mechanics panel. So got so much information to go over. Let's jump in quickly. Before we get started though, just a quick reminder, check out the description below for a link to my new Heroes and Legends Amazon affiliate site. I went ahead and organized a lot of the Magic the Gathering products on Amazon because it was always frustrating for me trying to shop for Magic on Amazon, and they've all been organized. And if you buy anything through those links, a small portion comes back to help the channel. So really appreciate that if you can do it. A lot of folks ask me if they can't do Patreon, is there something else they can do? Well, that would be a great way to help support the channel, and I realize sometimes it's hard for folks to do Patreon, so I wanted to give everyone another option. Okay, enough of all that business. Let's get into the real business, which is the cards at hand. And we're going to start off with a token. Now, this is a servo token, so the Tom Servo alters have already begun. Check out the internet for more information, but they're pretty funny, the ones I've seen. But this is a 1/1 token artifact servo creature, so we're going to see how this becomes relevant now as we get into more and more of the cards. I'm assuming this is going to be pretty prevalent, so much like maybe a Clue token or like the Eldrazi Scion tokens and stuff like that, there'll probably be a few different pieces of art, and these will repeat on the sheet, I would imagine. Alright, so we're going to start off looking at something completely new, and this is vehicles. We're going to have 3 vehicles to look at. This is the first one. Now, before I talk about the card specifically, let's talk about this mechanic a little bit. Basically, these come into play as artifact vehicles. To turn them into an artifact creature until end of turn, you have to pay the crew cost. Now, for example, this is a crew 1, which means tap any number of creatures you control with total power 1 or more. This vehicle becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. Now, the reason it says any number of creatures is because we're going to see in a few moments there's some that may be crew 2, crew 3, crew 4, and so on. So in the case of a crew 3, you could tap a 2/2 and a 1/1, for example. They would total a power of 3. That would turn the particular vehicle that's crew 3 into an artifact creature till end of turn. This time we're looking at 1, so it just has to have power of 1. So a 1/1, for example, would work very well. And like I said, we just saw a token that happens to be a 1/1. Imagine that. So a lot of these servo tokens will be able to have a dual purpose of not only just being creatures on their own, but will also be able to meet your crew cost requirements to turn on these vehicles, which is kind of amazing. So, having said that, let's talk about this vehicle in particular. It costs 4. It's a 6/1. It has trample and haste. Now, notice it has haste. That's something that's really important to know. Much like a land, when it comes to life and becomes a creature land, for example, it will still have summoning sickness. So when you play this, it will have summoning sickness. It wouldn't be able to attack normally, but because this one has haste, it could attack on the turn it comes into play. Now, once you kind of get beyond that fact of it, it is pretty simple. It's a 6/1 beater, basically, right? So this is kind of that ball lightning sort of effect on a creature, but with a new twist that we haven't seen before. Now, also keep in mind that you can use this defensively. If it's your turn, for example, someone's going to attack in, you can tap one of your creatures and bring this to life as a blocker. Also important to note that you can tap a summoning sick creature to meet the crew cost, much like any other cost for a card that says tap X amount of creatures or something like that. Doesn't matter if they're summoning sick. Overall, I think this is a good card in itself for limited. I'm just very excited overall about the vehicle mechanic. I just think there's so many possibilities here. I mean, the downside to a new mechanic like this is it's not backwards compatible with Magic. Like, you don't have a bunch of stuff from the last 20 years that's going to say, give all your vehicles +1/+1, or if you control a vehicle, draw a card, right? That stuff just doesn't exist, which makes it a little bit of a barrier for something like this to make into, say, Legacy or something like that, right? But that's okay, because this set, I think, is going to go a long way to start making vehicles a part of Magic, and that's actually kind of awesome. So you're going to see some cards as we go through that help make vehicles even better, especially in red and white. That seems to be the vehicle colors. It seems to be a Boros thing, which again is another kind of cool aspect of it, because when you think of Boros, you think of one of two things: either like super aggressive creatures attacking, or you think of kind of like the big angels and stuff like that. There's no like cool mid-range Boros game that makes sense together, but this is probably going to fit that category, which is kind of cool. So this will be awesome in Commander. I think this particular card will be a great limited card if nothing else. But like I said, the most exciting part of this card is it's our first look at vehicles. Let's look at another one. This one's maybe a little stronger. It's Sky Skiff, cost 2. It's a 2/3 flyer, crew 1. So again, just a 1 power creature can turn this thing on. Tap that creature, and you got yourself a 2/3 flyer. So it's almost like turning that 1/1 creature into a 2/3 flyer for the turn. Pretty awesome, and it's pretty cheap at 2 mana. I do think this one feels a little more push to me. This one's at the common level. Even though it can't put as much damage across as quickly like the previous uncommon we saw, I think this could do a lot of work in the right deck. So it's a little early to say what will or won't be standard compatible at this point, but maybe this has a chance. Definitely a great limited card. Alright, here's a mythic rare, and this is the last vehicle we have today. It's Sky Sovereign Consul Flagship. This thing costs 5. It's legendary artifact vehicle. Flying, 6/5. When this enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and this one is a crew 3. So it costs a little more to get this active, but 3 does not feel unreasonable to me. I mean, a 2/2 and a 1/1 will turn this thing on. That doesn't feel bad considering you're getting yourself a 6/5 flyer that's also able to lightning bolt a creature or planeswalker when it attacks. And I like the fact that you're paying 5 and you're still getting the 3 damage. Plus, you're getting yourself the ability, hopefully, to bring this thing to life and attack in with it or block with it. So this thing is actually kind of amazing, I think. Just a lot of value there for 5 mana. It's just doing a whole lot of stuff. Granted, it can't hit opponents directly, but I like the fact that it can deal with planeswalkers and it can deal with creatures. I think that's good enough considering you're also getting a 6/5 flyer attached to it. So this one, I think, is really pushed. Really exciting card. Again, this will be awesome, I think, in Commander decks. I like to see some cubes. Think about like how to incorporate vehicles into them, just because traditionally you think of like wide token decks and say artifact equipment, like the swords going together nicely. Like, could you put something like this in a cube and take out a sword maybe? And would that be as powerful or more powerful? Like, that type of stuff is really exciting just because we've never seen it before. I want to see what this can do. This feels pushed enough for standard, even though, like I said, it's a little early to make those calls probably until we see more cards, but I feel like this is just a really strong card. Alright, next we have another new mechanic. Now, I apologize for this particular photo. It was taken from a video, so it's not real clear. We're actually going to see the energy counter, which is the new symbol, in a few minutes, much clearer, so bear with me. But let's talk about the mechanic first, and then we'll talk about this card in particular. So we have a new kind of like magic currency, if you will. It's an energy counter. Now, an energy counter, think of it kind of like a poison counter, I guess, in a way. These are counters that would just belong to you as the player, and you can accumulate them as you play the game. So there'll be various ways to accumulate them. This card has a way to collect those counters, which we'll look at in a second. And then there'll be other cards that will allow you to pay energy counters for an effect or an ability. And you'll also see that on this card too. First off, you could accumulate some energy counters, and when you get to the point where you can pay for the effect, you can still cast your spells like normal that turn, but then you're getting this extra bonus effect with this kind of side currency that you have aside from mana, and that's very, very interesting. It just seems very efficient to me. I guess the downside of this mechanic, much like vehicles, is that this isn't backwards compatible with the last 20 years of Magic, that the only cards that have this ability, of course, will be in this set. So again, that puts it back a little bit from trying to fit into some of the more eternal formats. But that's okay, because I think they'll push this as well as vehicles pretty hard in this set as well as the next set. And, you know, new mechanics, they really want to see those do well, like on the big stage. They want them to be pushed. They want people to be able to play with them in standard. They want them to show up in the Pro Tour. So I think they'll be pretty strong, at least within this standard environment, if nothing else. But overall, I think it's, again, another really interesting creative mechanic. Quick history behind it, Mark Rosewater talked about it a little bit. This was a mechanic he actually wanted to have in Mirrodin. He actually developed it in Mirrodin. He called it Mechanic E for energy. In all these years, he just never had a space to put it in. He thought this might be a good opportunity. He thought about it for Shards of Allura and Esper, but it didn't really work since Esper was only a piece of Shards. So this time he thought this could be it. He kind of let his team come up with a concept independently without telling them what they came up with Mirrodin. They kind of came to the same conclusion, and here it is. After all these years, it finally made it into the set, which is pretty cool. So aside from all that, let's talk about this card. 2 white and 2. It's a bird. It's a rare. 3/3 flying. Whenever this or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get an energy counter. When this attacks, you may pay 2 energy counters. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it and tap up to 1 target creature defending player controls. Seems pretty good. Definitely a good limited card. I like the fact that you have a reoccurring way to increase your energy pool here. That's actually potentially relevant. Again, hard to say, like, is this good enough for standard? In a vacuum, probably not, but we haven't seen what you can do with energy yet, right? So if the things you can do with energy are super powerful, then all of a sudden this card becomes a lot better in, say, the standard format. Again, this is a card that might be really fun in Commander, or to try to work into cubes to work this new mechanic into those formats. I think that would be really sweet, actually. So yeah, this card looks pretty awesome. I'd be very happy to open this, I think, in a draft. And this is just a taste of what we're going to see for energy. We got more to come. Alright, next we have another new mechanic. And this is actually the third and final new mechanic. And I believe these are the only 3 main mechanics in the set. There may be a small tribal elements. For example, you're looking at one of the tribes here. So dwarfs are going to be tribal in white in this set. So let's talk about that first before we get to fabricate. A lot of folks have been really excited about the potential of dwarfs returning for a long time. As a matter of fact, dwarfs were in really the early days of Magic. They disappeared for a really long time. Wizards kind of went in different directions. They focused more on like elves and some other creature types like merfolk and so on. But they never really went back to dwarfs, and they're certainly a fan base that really wanted to see them. So it's finally happening. They've been redesigned a little bit. I mean, traditionally in the old days, you think of dwarfs being red creatures. This time they're in white. They're playing up a little more to the creative aspect of the dwarf archetype, you know, kind of like the blacksmith, that type of thought about the archetype, as opposed to living within mountains or something like that, which does feel more red. But I think that's great. I think this is a fine tribe for white. It's really cool that they're back. I know a lot of fans have been looking for this for a very long time, and it's finally happened, so that's always awesome. Let's talk about fabricate a little bit. Now, this one's a fabricate 1, so you could have potentially a 2 or 3 or so on. But when this creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it, or create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So if this was 2, then it would be 2 counters or 2 tokens, so on and so forth. Now the card itself, 1 white and 2 for a fabricate 1 2/2, that feels actually pretty push to me, because I would be very happy paying 3 for a 3/3 creature. Like, those are nice stats, and the fact that I have the ability to kind of say, you know what, maybe I'm going to take a 2/2 creature and a 1/1, that becomes very relevant considering what we just saw with vehicles, right? So I could have maybe that 1/1 servo token fire up one of my 1 crew vehicles and still have a 2/2 on the board, and it's just crazy value. So I think this is a really good card, actually. Fantastic for limited. Again, like I said, it's a little early to start talking about standard probably, but potentially, I mean, the power level I think is there. It just depends on if white needs something like this. But if nothing else, it's great to see that the dwarf creature type is back. That's pretty cool. Propeller Pioneer. This is another fabricate card. This is a white and 3 for a flyer, human artificer, 2/1, fabricate 1. This one doesn't feel quite as pushed to me. I mean, not that it's a bad card, but you pay 4 for potentially a 3/2 flyer. I mean, that's kind of like on par for limited. Like, that's just fine in limited. And I have the option to instead just take the 2/1 and get the servo token, which again becomes relevant if I need to pilot a vehicle. So that's actually pretty cool. It's going to be a fine limited card. This to me feels like more of something that's built for limited, though, than perhaps constructed. Right, now let's look at our lone black card of the day, which also includes a brand new creature type, which is pretty awesome. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, 2 black and 2 legendary creature, Aetherborn Rogue, 2/3 Death Touch. When this enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library. Exile one of them face down, then put the rest on the bottom of that library in random order. For as long as that card remains exiled, you may look at it, you may cast it, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast it. Okay, there's a lot to talk about here, so let's start with the obvious first. What is an Aetherborn? So they talked about this in the panel. Aetherborn, brand new creature type. This is going to be the creature type for black in this set. And what's actually pretty cool, at least to me, about this creature type is it's a really nice twist on how you look at black creatures. I mean, we're so used to the ghouls and ghosts sort of thing, right? Like the zombies and vampires and so on and so forth being in black over the years. But this takes black and really focuses more on kind of the excess, the decadence, the selfishness of black, more so than black feeling like it's this evil color of death and decay, which it can be, but I like the fact that that isn't the direction they're going in this set. So these creatures, they're basically, I guess, made out of the ether, and because of that, they don't have long lifespans, and they don't sleep at all. They just basically make the most of their time, and they go and they consume like all these new artifacts, and they go out and buy stuff at the fairs, and they go and eat and drink and party basically. And it's all about kind of that kind of black twist of, you know, selfishness and excess, but it doesn't feel like, it feels warranted considering the situation. I really like that design. Fantastic. Like, I'm very impressed by this character design in general for these creature types. Really cool. So anyway, aside from all that, let's talk about the card a little bit. Yeah, it's good. This is pretty awesome. It's legendary, right? So again, another card you can use as your commander. It's also a card that has good power attached to it. I mean, a 2/3 Death Toucher for 4 feels pretty good anyway, and then the fact that, okay, now I can just start messing around with your library, casting a spell from your library is pretty awesome. Now, what I really like about this is the opponent doesn't see what you took, so it's like I'm taking one of your cards and you're not going to know what it is until I beat you down with it later. Like, that's awesome. So I really like this. Again, it's hard to say power level wise where it will fit, but it feels like at 4 mana this could be standard playable. But I'm really excited about this again in Commander because it could potentially be cast a number of times and you get to use the effect a number of times. That's actually kind of awesome. Next we have Furious Reprisal, 1 red and 3. It's a sorcery, uncommon. It deals 2 damage to each of 2 target creatures and or players. This one feels more like a limited card for me. I do like the fact that you can do 4 damage spread between 2 targets. That's actually pretty good for 4 mana. So definitely a strong card in limited, I think. Don't know if it'll go much beyond that. But I also like the fact that they designed it to say up to 2 creatures and or players, so that it kind of works well in Commander or Two-Headed Giants. It just is worded right for multiplayer, so I think that's cool too. The best thing about this card, though, before I move on, I must say, is the flavor text. One of the plot points, I guess, to Kaladesh is going to be Chandra decides to return home to Kaladesh, and Liliana goes with her, and I guess Liliana is going to go and kind of like press her buttons a little bit and try to kind of push her more into the dark side, and the flavor text kind of shows that, which is kind of cool. Alright, next we have Speedway Fanatic, and this costs a red and 1. It's a 2/1 human pilot with haste, and whenever Speedway Fanatic crews a vehicle, that vehicle gains haste till end of turn. So a couple things real quick. First off, we're seeing a human pilot here. However, I think humans are going to be spread out through multiple colors. The creature type for red is actually goblin, and we haven't seen any goblin cards yet. We've seen some pictures of them and stuff. They look actually pretty neat, so I'm looking forward to see what they actually do and how they work. But for this card anyway, you get yourself a 2/1 haster for 2. Even if the card just stopped right there, I'd say sign me up. Now, red has been very successful in recent history, being super aggressive. That slowed down a little bit with the Shadows block. It felt like red got a little bigger and they're doing werewolves and vampires and stuff. but maybe this is a clue that red's going to return to its hyper aggressive ways, which is pretty neat. I know a lot of red players will be happy about that. So Alone is a 2/1 haste creature for 2. I'm happy. That feels standard playable to me, but then the fact that this happens to be on the board when I get a vehicle out, I can use this to be one of the pilots and get haste for that vehicle and use it right away. A lot of value to be had there too. So I think this is a real good one. Keep an eye on this, especially as we see more vehicles revealed. Alright, speaking of vehicles, next we have Start Your Engines. 1 red and 3, it's a sorcery. Vehicles you control become artifact creatures until end of turn. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. So, these effects are always pretty good in general, especially if you can go wide. If you have a lot of tokens, for example, and there is a fair amount of token generation, it appears, from what we've seen so far. Just that ability without any vehicles could be strong enough to perhaps win you the game in limited. Throw the vehicle clause in here and it becomes that much better. Your vehicles instantly come to life without needing crew members, and they also get the power buff. I'm sure this is there to early pick this card and then go for that vehicle deck and draft, and it could be very, very good for you, I have no doubt. It'd be very interesting as we see more vehicles revealed to just keep this card in mind that it exists out there. Perhaps there is some potential for standard. Again, too early to say, but seems like this could be definitely a great limited card in the right build. Alright, let's move on to green, and this card is another example of the energy counter mechanic, and this is Architect of the Untamed. It's a green and 2, Elf, Artificer, Druid. It's a rare 2/3. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get an energy counter. And then you can pay 8 energy counters to create a 6/6 colorless beast artifact creature token. So a couple things here. First off, you notice this is Elf creature type, and yes, elves will be in green. So it wasn't too long ago that we saw them. Obviously, it was Zendikar. But at the same time, this is a different twist on that archetype, so I think that's pretty cool. As far as the energy mechanic, here's another great example of that too. Whenever you play a land, you get some energy, and then when you get 8 and you pay into it, you get yourself a 6/6 colorless artifact creature. Now, it doesn't have evasion, but a 6/6 is a pretty good beater. So if nothing else, I do think this is a good limited card. If it goes any further than that, it will be because the energy mechanic is just really, really strong. And it probably won't have anything to do with the 6/6 creature as much as it will be you need ways to accumulate energy to maybe do something else that's really good and broken, right? So if that's the case, this could be decent. We'll have to keep an eye on it and see. But overall, again, I'm really impressed with this mechanic in general. I think it seems like a lot of fun. Alright, let's move on to some multicolor, and this one's a good one. It's Apollo Pilot Exemplar. We have a white, a red, and 1 for a legendary dwarf pilot. Rare, 3/3, wait for it. Other dwarfs you control get +1/+1. Each vehicle you control gets +1/+1 as long as it's a creature. And whenever this becomes tapped, you may pay X. If you do, reveal the top X cards of your library, put all dwarfs and vehicle cards from among them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. So not only have dwarfs come back in a big way, but we already got a dwarf lord. We didn't even have to wait to come back to Kaladesh like 4 years from now. We got it right off the bat. That's pretty awesome, and it's also a vehicle lord on top of it, and it's a great way to just continually get heat put into your hand. You can just keep tapping this thing, whether you're attacking with it or maybe more likely using it to crew a vehicle. You get to search for more dwarfs and more vehicles out of the top of your deck. This is amazing. So first off, great commander. Like, this is a way for you to just out of the gate make a dwarf deck if you want to, or make a vehicle based commander deck if you want to. You can just go in and pull all the dwarfs and or vehicles from this set, and you can even go back to get some of the dwarfs from the old days of Magic and probably hobble together a pretty fun deck just right off the bat. Awesome. Now, this also, I should note, can work in tiny leaders. I know it's a format that maybe isn't as popular as it once was, but I know a lot of players still play it, so I'm always excited to see a tiny leaders potential leader get printed, so this could work in that format as well. This just seems really fun and just really good. So yeah, because it's so cheap too, I think it could be standard playable. Again, we'll have to see where standard goes, what direction, if that deck's a thing. But this is a great Boros card and great Boros commander potentially. I really like this one a lot. Next, we have another really powerful multicolor card. This one's Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. It's a blue, a green, and 2. This one's a mythic, elf druid, 2/3, legendary. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, when converted mana cost less than that spell's, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you don't cast the revealed card, put it in your hand. Okay, so I'm paying 4 for a 2/3 creature, but now the first time I cast a spell each turn, now notice it's each turn, not just my turn, so if I play any instance on an opponent's turn, it works there too. At worst, I'm drawing a card. At worst. At best, I'm drawing the card and I'm getting to play it for free right away. But at worst, I'm drawing a card. This is incredible. A control deck, I think, would love to have something like this. This is definitely standard playable. This potentially is modern playable. I would even go as far as to say maybe legacy playable. I don't know what deck yet. I guess I'd have to kind of think about that. And I haven't really had time to sit down and do that yet. But yeah, this is good. I think this is a super push card. Again, it's also viable for commander. It can be a commander being a legendary creature, and it can repeatedly come back if it gets destroyed. Just make its return and just keep doing it again. And especially a multiplayer game where you may have some instance in your hand, you could play one on each of your opponent's turns and get more value out of this card. This just seems like you get crazy pretty quick. I really like this one too. There's really some strong cards we've seen today for sure. And speaking of strong cards, the hits keep coming. We have a Planeswalker now. This is Saheeli Rai. 1 red, 1 blue, and 1. She's a 3 loyalty Planeswalker. +1, scry 1. She deals 1 damage to each opponent. -2. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control, except it's an artifact in addition to its other creature types. That token gains haste, exile it at the beginning of the next end step. And -7, search your library for up to 3 artifact cards with different names. Put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Okay, so first off, 3 casting cost Planeswalkers. I love 3 casting cost Planeswalkers. And she has 3 loyalty, which is actually pretty decent considering she costs 3. Now, back when Liliano spoiled, that was a card that I actually thought would be good. I was actually kind of excited about. Wasn't sure it was going to make the splash that it did make. It actually surpassed my expectations, but I thought it was going to be a good card. Even the same with Nissa. I really thought Nissa was going to be strong. A lot of people kind of get down on these 3 casting cost Planeswalkers because they don't seem quite as crazy and splashy as some of the more expensive ones, but I still think this one, much like the previous 2 I mentioned, can be quite good. I think this will see standard play. And here's what I'm thinking about this one. Like, I don't feel like this is always a Planeswalker you want to put down, just try to ultimate. Like, that's possible in maybe the Boros deck. If you have a lot of token creatures, like a lot of servos or something like that, to protect her, that could be a thing. But I really see her being especially good if I have maybe a good artifact creature that's on the board with evasion, and then I can just kind of put her down, minus her, and just attack in with a second copy of it, maybe even just take the game and just steal a game that way. Like, I think that's where she could potentially really shine. So I like this card a lot. I think, again, definitely standard playable. This is going to be awesome, again, in commander decks and in cubes in the future. And again, this is definitely a limited bomb. Alright, let's move on to artifacts with Aetherworks Marvel. This is another mythic. It costs 4, legendary artifact. Whenever a permanent you control is put into a graveyard, you get an energy counter. And then you can tap and pay 6 energy counters. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast a card from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. Now, I guess living the dream with this, you want to get some cheap creatures out that give you energy tokens, and then go ahead and play this and hopefully just tap into an Emrakul. Because notice you get to cast the creature, so you even get the cast effect. That would be amazing. How consistent will that be? I don't know, right? It just depends on what kind of viable decks are out there, how fast the metagame is when the set comes out. Again, it's really too early to tell. Is it possible? Yeah, I think it's possible this thing could see standard play. Maybe it works its way into the Delirium deck, and it's just another way to get Emrakul out faster. Who knows? It's possible. Again, it would take a lot of time to kind of test it out and kind of see where things go from here. But I wouldn't count it out. I think it will be a good card. Now, aside from that, this is amazing. And like Commander, again, another really strong cube card too. I just love this concept of the energy counters. I think that could be potentially powerful because, again, you're getting an effect without paying mana. Granted, you're building up the resource a different way, but it's an additional resource to the mana you already have on the board. And you combine that with, say, a Planeswalker, it's almost like getting 3 effects a turn when normally you would only get 1. So I think there is a lot of power to be had behind this mechanic. Alright, next card comes to us from a Japanese language spoiler. Loosely translated, I would think it's Gold Wire Familiar. Costs 3. It's an artifact creature fox. And when this enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. When this creature dies, draw a card. It's a 2/2. It's also an uncommon. Now, I think the first thing you're going to say is, well, this isn't really as good as Solemn Simulacrum. No, it's not, but what's going to be, quite honestly, in today's day and age, right? Like, that card's too good. Let's face it. I mean, that card sees playing Vintage and Legacy. It's just too good. It was printed very strongly at the time, even. So this feels more like a fixed version of that card for me. And having said that, I think it's just fine. It's definitely very good and limited, and I think it could even be standard playable. I mean, you don't want to pay 3 for a 2/2, and the 2 life probably doesn't really matter most of the time. But the fact that when this dies, you do get card draw, I think is important enough to make it viable. Again, it's not going to knock your socks off because you've seen Solemn and you know what Solemn can do, and this isn't quite that, but I think you kind of have to put that out of your mind when you evaluate this card and just look at the card for what it is, and I still think it could be quite strong. I think it could see some standard play and definitely very good and limited, even if it's nowhere else. World Maker, cost 3, artifact, it's an uncommon. And pay 4 and tap, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So a lot of folks were worried, I think, at the beginning of the panels where they're talking about the servo tokens. No one saw Thopter tokens right away. It took a little while before they showed this card. But Thopter tokens do appear to be a thing. Now, granted, the reason the fabricate mechanic makes servo tokens is simply because, let's face it, Thopter tokens are too good. I mean, 1/1 flyers, that would be no decision at all. You're always going to make the 1/1 flyer, right? You don't even have to think about that. I mean, look at cards like Lingering Souls. I mean, 1/1 flyers can get out of hand, just take over a game, especially with the vehicles mechanic, because not only can you just attack with them, but you can also put them in vehicles. That seems like it could get crazy fast. So this is at least one way to get Thopter tokens. I'm sure there's going to be more, but I think this is actually a good card. I think at first glance it feels expensive, like 3 to cast and 4 to activate feels a little much, but you know what decks want this? Control decks. Control decks would love this. They could sweep the board and just start rebuilding this army of Thopters, even just making 1 Thopter a turn. That's good enough to sometimes just take over a game if you have enough control to back it up. Again, don't know where the metagame is going to go, but if control decks continue to be as strong as they have been, this potentially could see some standard play again. What's kind of funny is you look back to a few years back, we had a card called the Hive. This is much better than the Hive, and the Hive at the time wasn't a bad card back in the old days of Magic. Obviously, a lot's changed, but this card a lot more competitively costed, and I feel like this could be pretty decent. Alright, last card of the day, it's a land, Inventors Fair, legendary land, it's a rare. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life, tap for colorless mana, or you can pay 4 and tap, sacrifice it, search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your library, but you can only activate this only if you control 3 or more artifacts. Having said that, great card. I think this is phenomenal. I mean, tutors are good, right? Tutors are always good. I think it's cool this is a little bit of a nod to Metalcraft. It's not Metalcraft. I don't think that's going to be in the set. But this is kind of like, hey, remember Metalcraft? And they worked it in here. I think that's pretty cool. Like I said, tutoring is great, so this card's going to be a bomb for you in limited. There's going to be a lot of great targets for it, I'm sure. I think this will see standard play. Again, not only is it a land that's going to give you mana at the beginning of the game, but potentially could also gain you a little bit of life, which might not always matter, but if you're up against a hyper-aggressive deck, like if red aggressive does become a thing, this all of a sudden becomes better. I think this is good enough even to potentially see modern play or even some of the Eternal formats, just because you have decks like Affinity, and I feel like this could be pretty good in the Affinity deck. I mean, it gives you a tutor. One of the issues with Affinity is sometimes you just run out of gas. Like, this is a way to hopefully keep the cards flowing into the mid portion or later portion of the games. I think there's a lot of potential for this card. Watch out for this one. It's a rare. I feel like they maybe even could have made this one mythic. I'm glad they didn't. And even though it's legendary, it has the sacrifice effect, so you won't feel necessarily like you're going to get flooded with these in your hand, because when the time comes, you just sacrifice one and then you can play the next one. Really, really good card. I've been very impressed with this one, and the art's amazing on this. Also, I should point out, if you notice at the bottom of the card, it says Story Spotlight 1 of 5 and MTGstory.com on the bottom. They've been doing kind of Story Spotlight cards for a little while now, but this actually calls them out, so I think that's pretty cool, because I honestly didn't really know which cards in the set were supposed to be the spotlight cards other than they would tell you what they were, but just looking at them I couldn't tell. So I think that's actually pretty cool, and it might get more people interested in the lore and give them the website to go check it out, get more information. I think that's a cool idea. Alright, having said that was a lot of cards. 18 cards, 3 new mechanics. That was awesome. So I'm going to keep watching PAX, and I will be back. I'm sure there's going to be more spoilers coming, so I will be back tomorrow with another video, and we'll talk about the cards that we've seen in the next 24 hours, and as long as there's still spoilers coming on Sunday, I'll do the same. And then I believe Monday is going to be the start of the official Kaladesh spoilers that will start coming out, like on Wizards website and everything. So I will just continue making these videos as the cards come out, and compile all the information for you, and then eventually when we get there, we'll do the full set review as we always do. So hey, as always, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.